Ryan English walked into Washington with a folding knife and 2 Molotov cocktails to kill Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent 2 hours after he was sworn in. The federal judge could have given him 121 months. Instead, he gave him 73, 6 years. The judge explained why out loud, and I want you to hear this reasoning for yourself. We're talking about 121 months. That was the ceiling, and the judge went to 73 and gave English 4 years back. And Bessent never said a word about it until last month, when he stood up in Washington and dared the press to show up. His line, quote, "Any of you who want to report that this is a fiction and does not exist, be there for the sentencing this August." And that's the sitting cabinet secretary calling reporters liars to the faces. I'm going to roll that clip. I'm also going to put the judge's own reasoning for the discounted sentence on your screen. You see, Scott Bessent stood there in Washington last month and told the press to show up in August. That's a man running on pure grit, and grit burns you down at the cellular level. So here's the mechanism. Your mitochondria are batteries that power everything, and when they drain, fatigue and slow healing move in. Red and near-infrared light therapy is one of the most well-researched tools we have, and studies show it helps cells produce more energy, reduces cellular level stress, and supports natural repair processes. I researched this alongside health journalist Jonathan Otto, then I got a Red Life unit for myself. Thank you, Jonathan. 9 clinically studied wavelengths, dual chip technology, twice the power of standard devices and built to actually work. Go to myredlight.com/NNN. Links in the description. Use NNN Rep 25 for individual items, 25% off individual devices, NNN Rep 30 for bundles, 30% off. Stock is limited. Now let's get back to that courtroom. See, English turned himself in. He walked up to Capitol Police and told them what he was carrying. And that's the part the sentence hangs on. Surrender as mitigation. So the man who came to burn Bessent alive gets credit for changing his mind at the door. And what you see how the reaction lane handles that. So let's get into it here. Molotov plot against Bessent. Judge hands back 73 months. A transgender woman, this is how Fox News frames it, a transgender woman convicted of crimes tied to an attempted assassination of Treasury Secretary Bessent sentenced 73 months in prison. He previously revealed he was targeted just 2 hours after being sworn in, calling the case evidence of a real threat from violent left-wing extremism. Eric Darty says 73 months isn't close to enough, and he's got tape of Bessent daring the press to show up for the sentencing. Transgender leftists who tried to assassinate Bessent sentenced to 73 months in prison. Ryan English claims to be a woman and admitted to showing up with weapons and Molotovs to take Bessent out after he was confirmed to the Treasury. He needed more time in prison. Thank God Bessent is safe. Let's check in here.
Accused of trying to assassinate Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is set to be sentenced today as security threats continue to surround the Trump administration. Lucas Tomlinson is reporting live from the White House on this. Good morning, Lucas.
Good morning, Dana. The Treasury Secretary never spoke about this attempted assassination until talking about it here in Washington just last month.
I was the subject of an assassination attempt February 2024 by an adult left-wing activist 2 hours after being sworn into my job. So any of you who want to report that this is a fiction and does not exist, be there for the sentencing this August.
Here we are, Dana. Right now, that sentencing hearing is taking place here in the nation's capital. 24-year-old Ryan English of South Deerfield, Massachusetts, pled guilty for charges related to attempted assassination of then cabinet member nominee Scott Bessent and for carrying a dangerous weapon on the grounds of the Capitol, according to U.S. Attorney Janine Pirro. According to court documents, about 3:12 p.m. on January 27, 2025, a week after the inauguration, English approached a U.S. Capitol police officer near the south door of the Capitol building and stated, "I'd like to turn myself in." English admitted to possessing a knife and 2 Molotov cocktails. Incidents like this and multiple assassination attempts on President Trump's life, which motivated the president to build the ballroom.
This is for future presidents. This isn't for me. This is for future presidents. And it's a gift. We're making a gift to our country, spending hundreds of millions of dollars to build a ballroom.
President Trump weighing in on the ballroom and the reason why. Nick Sorter lays out what English admitted to Molotov cocktails at the Capitol meant for Bessent's feet during the confirmation vote. He writes, the trans guy who traveled to D.C. intent to kill Bessent, now sentenced, Trans violence is completely out of control. And of course, we have that clip. He says he got off too easy. What do you think?
I was the subject of an assassination attempt February 2024 by an addled left-wing activist 2 hours after being sworn into my job.
Now the numbers behind the number, Lucas Tomlinson breaks down why the judge went 73 months when the max was 121 and the 20 months already credited.
District judge has sentenced Michael Riley English to 73 months in prison for crimes related to an attempted assassination of Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. And this crime took place about a week after the inauguration, when Bessent was a Treasury Secretary nominee. And the suspect, Riley, has now been convicted of 73 months. Actually turned himself in to the U.S. Capitol Police, saying he had 2 Molotov cocktails and a knife. And the judge, when handing out the sentence, was just over 6 years. Some people may have been wondering why it's not longer. The judge took that in consideration, was facing a maximum of 121 months in prison. But the judge took that in consideration. This is something, Kaylee, we didn't know about until just last month, when at least we hadn't heard from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, when he said last month what it meant to have this person try to attempt an assassination on his life. So again, 73 months is the sentence for Michael Riley English. And that sentence should be going to be started soon. And the judge is awarding 20 months time served already for the time English remained in prison.
So, the wire version of it, straight from Breaking 911. Transgender woman convicted of crimes tied to assassination attempt. Well, Bessent wasn't just a target here. Donnie Cope reports Bessent, Marco Rubio were sitting on a decoy Air Force One out of Turkey when President Trump flew a different jet. You may have heard about this. A decision to sneak President Trump out of Ankara on a separate Air Force One jet last month was made about 4 or 5 hours before his scheduled departure, driven by intel that an Iranian terror cell had snuck into Turkey with a shoulder-fired missile, according to a senior Trump administration official. I was actually, when he was going to Turkey, I was terrified that this would occur. I had a feeling that he would be a sitting duck there. And of course, behind the scenes, all these things happen. So, you know, you can just kind of tell the way the temperature in the world is right now. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Secretary Bessent were on a decoy flight last month when President Trump secretly took a different plane from the publicly identified Air Force One aircraft from the NATO summit, according to sources. War Secretary Pete Hegseth was on a secret flight with President Trump out of Turkey. Rubio and Bessent, who separated and maintained the line of secession, were aware the president was on another secret plane. Several other White House aides were on the decoy flight, including Miller, Scharf, Chung, Needham, and Worthington and Crowley. While the plane the president was traveling on is supposed to be identified as Air Force One, the decoy flight was publicly identified as Air Force One. So this elaborate deception wasn't improvised. It traces back to a 2018 Christmas trip to Iraq, where a British plane spotter blew President Trump's cover by photographing the unmistakable presidential jet over South Yorkshire, forcing the White House to develop increasingly sophisticated deceptions for every secret trip since. And now we fill in the gaps here. Constitution X. This is what will raise the hair on your neck. A catering truck, a ghost military jet, an Iranian cell with a shoulder-fired missile.
I agree with David that this is highly unusual, and you know, Caitlin, you cover the White House and the president. You know how the machinations of his travel normally work. But I think it was unusual because it sounds to me like the threat was unusual. I mean, it sounds like this was a very, very serious threat to the president's safety. And when you consider that he's already survived numerous assassination attempts, or people at least thinking about assassinating him, and you consider the region that he was in, I'm glad they engaged in all this cloak and dagger and all this deception to keep him safe. I think every time he walks outside of the White House, whether he's traveling domestically or internationally, somewhere in his mind he must believe, you know, I don't know if I'm coming back here tonight because of what he has lived through. I fear for him and what might happen to him every single day. And, you know, this story raised up the hairs on the back of my neck when you consider how they had to move him around. But I'm glad they did it, and I'm glad they got him back to the United States safely. I'm glad he was at the meeting over there, by the way. It was important for the American president to be there. But you can only imagine, and David knows this, the level of threat and the level of alarm that would have been required to set up this kind of deception must have been extremely heavy.
And that is where President Trump, right there on your screen, being smuggled out in a catering truck from Air Force One. Absolutely wild. These are the times that we are living in right now. Be there for the sentencing this August. That's what Scott Bessent said on camera in Washington to a press corps that spent a year pretending violent left-wing extremism against the administration was a fiction. Well, August came, the sentencing happened, and the cameras that swore it wasn't real got 6 years and a shrug. So show me the outlet that ran a correction today. Nobody. Bessent told him exactly when and where to be, and the same people who called this made up couldn't be bothered to sit in the room. And that's the fight we're in. Not a judge who went soft, though he did. 4 years soft. It's an entire industry that decided a knife and 2 firebombs aimed at a cabinet secretary wasn't a story. Wasn't a story worth their time. So you carry it. Send this to the person in your life who told you political violence only runs one direction, and drop the sentence number in the comments and let it sit there. And subscribe, because we're going to keep the names and the numbers in front of you when the networks won't, which is exactly why we built you a way around them. You see, Bessent had to stand up in a room and demand the press show up, and that's how blocked the real reporting is. So text White House to 844-840-4963. Next News Network sits in the White House press pool. And what we pull straight out of that building lands on your phone every night, including the pieces that never fit into a 12-minute segment. Now, some of you are done being an audience and you want an assignment. We'll text Signal to that same number, enlist in the Signal Corps, and start taking real missions. Your operations get tracked, you rank up, so get in tonight.